Hello and welcome to Niche References, where I yap about my niche interests so that I don't annoy my friends and family with them. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to be once again yapping about my favorite TV show, The Genius. I'm in the middle of a full series rewatch, and I'm ranking the main matches and players of each season, and today it's time to rank the players of Season 2 Rule Breaker. Like with Season 1, my criteria for ranking the players is a lot looser than it is for the main matches. I generally try to take into account and balance their gameplay, their entertainment value, the character they bring to the show, and my own personal bias. Because, of course, I like certain players more than other players, regardless of their gameplay. Like with Season 1, these rankings are purely based on these players as they appear in Season 2, not in any previous or subsequent seasons that they played in. Enough preamble, you know the spiel at this point, let's just jump in. Unfortunately, I think this is one of the easier seasons to choose a last place player, and in Season 2, it is unfortunately Jae-kyung. I won't go as far as to name her the worst Genius player of all time because I do kind of want to do a full player ranking once I'm done with all of these, but I do think it's fair to call her the least impactful Genius player of all time. She's hardly present in the premiere and also barely featured in the episode where she's eliminated. The most we really see of her in episode 2 is when Dewey is begging her to swap seats in Seed Exchange so that his team can win. As I flagged up in my main match ranking, I think that in the moment she was in the right not to switch. Obviously, results oriented, she was not, but the Alliance wouldn't have been able to protect her, and surely whoever was the deathmatch candidate would have turned their ire on her and picked her anyway. I got the sense that her biggest weakness in the game was just that she couldn't really find her footing socially. It seemed like her game sense wasn't terrible, but she could never quite get into a good alliance or get anyone to really stick with her. Even Doohee, who seemingly had her in his back pocket, wasn't even really working with her. He was just trying to use her. Given that she is so underrepresented in the season, it's kind of hard to get a sense of her as a player, but I do think it says a lot that the other players cared so little for her that all of them were willing to turn against her in her deathmatch against Hongchul for the price of a few garnets. Personally, I wish we had seen more of her. I like her group Rainbow and thought she seemed very likable, but ultimately she ends up leaving without making much impact at all. And second to last, I have allowed Hui-jung to get a single place higher purely for the level of entertainment he provided. His character arc in episode 1 is one of those moments in The Genius that feels like it has to be scripted. He already comes in guns blazing during the rehearsal and forms this big alliance with him at the center. And then in the main match, when he goes to pick his character, of course he picks letter A, because that's number 1. And it just so happens to be what he perceives as the strongest animal, the lion. So he already feels invincible and his massive ego balloons even more. And he runs around telling other people point blank that his win is already assured. And then he bosses Yoon-sun around and she chooses not to listen to him because she wants to remain loyal to her alliance and doesn't like him very much. So, of course, he loses because actually the lion is definitely not the best animal to be in the food chain game, and he didn't calculate for the fact that sometimes weaker characters have strength in numbers. What a beautiful metaphor for life, huh? And then he gets picked for the death match by the winners because he was so cocky, picks Yoon-sun, and in another beautiful twist of fate, he loses to her. You cannot write stuff like this. Fact is more beautiful than fiction. It's just such a beautiful character arc succinctly packed into one perfect episode. And obviously, I recount that whole story to say that, yeah, he plays terribly, and his elimination is truly entirely his own making. And I'm glad it was contained all to one episode because I typically don't enjoy watching these very egotistical players, and I would be very annoyed if I had to watch him for more than one episode. At number 11, I have Dae. I really need to have a word with this season and its undercasting and under-editing of women. Obviously, Dae seems to have an understated personality compared to someone like Hongchul per se, but if you're gonna cast so few women, I need you to at least show the few women that you choose to cast. And if you're going to under-edit the women when they have understated personalities that conform to Korean standards expected of women, maybe cast more women along the lines of Yoon-sun or Kyungran, who are going to be more outspoken. We're literally only 3 people into this list, and I've already talked about 2 women, half of the women on the cast who barely appeared on the show at all. And in Tae's case, there's really no reason for it because she won both of the previous main matches and still barely shows up in this show. I've put her here because from what I can tell of what we do see of her on the show, she seemed like she was one of the people who was really in the middle of the strategy for all 3 main matches she was there for, and for the elevator game where she was a guest as well. But unfortunately for her, her alliance decided to trust Dewey. And if rule number 1 in the season is to not trust Sangmin, rule number 2 is to not trust Dewey. So she seems pretty solid as a player. We get a little bit of evidence of that, but not a lot, and she ends up being pretty non-existent as a character. Speaking of untrustworthy people, at 10th place I have Dewey. Back in the day I had him a bit higher, but I found myself not really liking him very much this rewatch. He's a very interesting character in that he presents himself as so meek and unassuming, but he is one of the quickest players to backstab and be vindictive. I think this is most blatant and most icky to me in his interactions with Jae-kyung. I think he saw her as someone that he had fully in his back pocket, able to use however he wanted, and when she didn't completely follow what he wanted because it wasn't in her best interest, he went out of his way to ensure that she lost the death match and was swiftly out of there. It read to me very much as the quote-unquote nice guy who thought the popular girl liked him, and when she didn't, he lashed out. It might be a total misread, that's just a vibe check, but I didn't like his vibes this time around. As for his gameplay, like I mentioned, he's very backstabby. I think he was someone who was really excited to be playing the genius trademark, and really wanted to be in the middle of the gaming and the backstabbing without always considering when he should be doing so. It frequently feels like he chooses betrayal because it's just the more fun option, not the better gameplay option. And some people can absolutely get away with that without turning everyone off, but he could not. You could argue that the ID theft never would have happened if he hadn't backstabbed Yu Young a few episodes prior. Because of that, I don't think he's someone who has much win equity in a season of The Genius. He's at the center of some of the biggest moments of the season, but I don't love his gameplay, and I didn't really like him as a character this time around, so he ends up fairly low on my list. In 9th place, I have Eun-gil. He was someone I was immediately drawn to when I first saw the cast, but I think the reason I found him interesting is the same reason he didn't do very well. He's so obviously wolfy. He wears all black with sunglasses and has this whole aura of mystery about him, which I personally love. But unfortunately, it's not great to look so obviously suspicious on a show where scheming and betrayal are so prevalent. And especially if you're going to be one of those people who is scheming and betraying. In episode 3, a full main match before he actually betrays his team, he's suspected of betraying his team, and we're not really given a reason for it, so it's seemingly just because he's kind of a suspicious guy. As much as I love his mysterious vibe, you're much better off presenting yourself the way Ji-won does, as completely unassuming and doofy. I see Eun-gil as a player with good survival instincts. He was someone who was always willing to jump ship when he was in trouble. And he clocked the Broadcaster Alliance before it even really formed, and tried to stop it from happening. As I mentioned in my main match rankings, his elimination is one of my sore spots in this season because I'm on the same wavelength as Jinho. He betrayed his team to help Jinho's team win, therefore Jinho's team should be protecting him by any means necessary. Unfortunately, I think he was just not socially integrated enough for the other players on Jinho's team to keep his secret. Several of them flat out told the other team on top of the obvious purposeful and accidental hints. In a way, it was really the early hints at the Broadcaster Alliance that got him, so the thing that he was concerned about was what got him in the end. Every season, I tend to have one character that really feels like they got a raw end of the deal that I wanted to see more from. That for me in season 1 was Changyop, and Eun-gil is that for me in this season. He's someone who didn't get a ton of screen time, but every time he was on screen, he seemed to have a decent head for strategy, and he's someone I would have liked to see get further into the game. Speaking of presenting yourself as completely unassuming and doofy, in 8th place, I have Ji-won. I really don't know what to do with this man. For someone who makes such a deep run into the season, I should have something, literally anything to say about his gameplay, but I really don't. I guess you could argue he has a good social game because his alliances are essentially the only thing keeping him afloat all season, but it's really more that he just has friends in the cast who are willing to keep him around. And they're even more incentivized to do so because he never seems to present any strategic threat at all. Despite him being included in the Broadcasters Alliance, he never really seems to be much of a useful team member when it comes to the actual strategy of the games. Even the few impressive things that he did, like beating Jinho in a poker deathmatch, felt like a fluke. And to be fair, it makes him a decent character because he is just this goofy doofy guy bumbling around. But other players like Hongchul are funnier, and other hapless bumbling players like Jonghyun are more endearing, so it's hard to enjoy him very much. Plus, any goodwill that he gets from his generally endearing demeanor is a bit ruined by the ID theft. Because in my opinion, if you're gonna get the ick from anyone involved in the ID theft, Jiwon has to be your number one candidate because on top of taking the ID, he also betrayed Dewey in the deathmatch to ensure his elimination. I can't be too mad at Jiwon for the deathmatch part. Dewey would surely take revenge if he stayed in the game and Jiwon was closely aligned with Yu Young, so ultimately it is probably the correct strategic choice, but with everything else combined, Jiwon essentially single-handedly eliminated Dewey from the game. So he kind of manages to never make any strategic moves at all, and then the one time he does, it's the most ruthless, cutthroat, highly contested move in the entire history of the Genius. So in a way, maybe we should be glad that he spent most of the season as a passenger princess being carried by his more competent friends. Speaking of his more competent friends, I swear I didn't do this on purpose. At number 7, I have Yu Young, who's also the player I'm most torn on, which is why she lands directly in the middle of the list. If I were purely considering gameplay, she would absolutely deserve to be higher on this list, definitely in the top 5. But with all things considered, this feels like a fair spot for her, if perhaps still a little bit low. My biggest hang-up with her is that she's deeply involved in the 2 incidents in the season, and really the only 2 incidents in the Genius overall, that left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Those, of course, being the betrayal of Eungyul and the ID theft. She accidentally betrays Eungyul to Yoon-sun and then purposely sells him out to Jiwon. And then, of course, in the ID theft, she and Jiwon are the 2 main perpetrators. I feel like there's an unspoken rule of fair play in the Genius that doesn't exist in other shows, and she's the person who seems to most frequently be willing to break that rule. To be fair, I think that if she pulled these moves on other shows, I would look favorably on them because she largely seems to do so in order to be loyal to the broadcasters. But something about the Genius makes me not like them here, and perhaps that's unfair to her. I will fully admit that. It's very hard for me to parse through. However, although I found myself not liking her very much at certain points in the season, it's impossible to deny that she is one of the best in the season on a pure gameplay level. There are a lot of very passive players this season, and she is not one of them. She's consistently actively gaming, actively strategizing, and on the whole, she's very good at it. My first time through the season, I didn't have strong feelings on her one way or the other because she's not a huge character, but on this rewatch, she very handily came across as one of the more competent players despite ending up in death matches relatively frequently. And by late season, I did find myself liking her more on a character level. So she ends up being a bit of a mixed bag, which therefore lands her directly in the middle of my list. But I'll fully admit that she probably deserves to be a couple places higher than I've put her. At 6th place, I have Jonghyun, who's another player I really don't know what to do with. So many players this season are good in one area and very poor in other areas, and Jonghyun is one of those. He's a very likable character, but literally what is he doing strategically at any given time? He stumbles into 2 early wins, and I'm not even sure he knew how he did it sometimes. His social game for most of the season is a complete disaster. No one wants to work with him, no one wants to let him into their alliance. And he typically responds by seemingly still not doing anything. We get so many shots of him just dejectedly sitting around the set. A personal favorite of mine is one where, like, in the middle of the whole Token of Immortality debacle, he's just sitting in a chair, seemingly knocking on the back of a board or a picture frame or something, buddy, what are you doing? I want to assume that he was trying to come up with some strategies all those times he was sitting by himself, but I don't think we have any proof of that, really. He's almost always the last player to learn about something happening, like with the Token of Immortality and the dice in God's Judgment. By the late game, he does seem to kind of find his footing socially, possibly because he's seen as a non-threat. Perhaps the one good strategic move he makes all season is to align himself with Sangmin, because much like Jiwon, he's someone Sangmin is never going to feel threatened by and can use as a pawn going forward. But he ends up this high largely because of how likable he is as a character. He is one of those bumbling, hapless characters who's very likable, especially in a season full of people who aren't very likable. And I do think that he has one strategic strength, which is death matches. He wins his first death match in Black and White against Yu Young, who's no slouch strategically. So overall, he's not the best player in the world, but he is a very endearing character in a season with a desperate lack of them. In 5th place, I have Yoon-sun. Honestly, it's kind of wild to me every time I remember that she's the season's 5th boot, because for the entirety of the time that she's in the game, she's one of the main characters. In my mind, she very much just is the main character of the first half of the season. And I do almost always find myself rooting for her, except when she's in opposition to Jinho. She's another of the people actively playing the game at every turn, and often in a very cards-up, bold fashion that a lot of the players seem to dislike. I will once again briefly cite misogyny, the same way I did with both Kyungran and Eunji, who in combination feel like apt comparisons for Yoon-sun. She feels like an underdog for the majority of her time on the season because although she's clearly one of the biggest strategists, it often doesn't get her anywhere in the end. She gets dragged to the deathmatch after food chain, her alliance loses in seed exchange, her team gets betrayed in both King Game and Blackout Game, and she's on a bit of an island in Seven Commandments. She's kinda just thwarted at every single turn, despite consistently seeming like a solid strategic threat. One of the big things I really respect about her is that similar to Eungyul, she's one of the first people to jump ship when things are going poorly for her alliance. She's always willing to switch up things to save herself, and it's always much better to have that survival instinct than to be someone who accepts defeat. The game's not over until it's over, and Yoon-sun will fight until that last dying breath, and I love that about her. She's definitely not my favorite player of all time. She actually really rose in my estimation on this rewatch, but I really enjoyed the short time that we had with her, and I do wish that she could have stayed longer. In 4th place, I have Hongchul. Obviously, he's one of the biggest characters of the season, perhaps even eclipsing Sangmin and Jinho at times. Rewatching the season now that I've seen a lot more Korean variety shows, it's very clear that Hongchul is an absolute seasoned professional. He's always the one they quick cut to for a reaction because he's always going to give one. He very clearly understands the over-the-top editing style of Korean variety shows and plays into that and plays up his personality in a way that fits in perfectly to it. However, for that same reason, he can, at times, get a bit grating. Like I said in my main match ranking, he's always on a level 11 out of 10, and it never turns off. He writes this really interesting line where he's always so positive and smiley that it frequently toes the line and tips into a kinda sinister mustache twirly villain vibe. As for his strategic chops, I think he's somewhere in the middle. He's definitely not as savvy as some other players, but he's also not a slouch who completely relies on his allies to get him through. Obviously, his strongest point is his social game. Everyone loves him, everyone wants to work with him, you're never gonna find him on the outs or without an alliance, and in a season with some fairly set season-long alliances, he's someone who is frequently able to float between them without real incident. He works with Jinho's team in the King Game and Blackout Game, and eventually pivots to join the rest of the broadcasters in the middle of the season, and then also works with people like Yeowon later in the season, and also seems comfortable working on his own when he needs to. I think he's probably someone who will nearly always make a deep run on the Genius solely thanks to his social bonds with the other players, and that's nothing to scoff at. Anything that can get you further to the end of the game is something that will get you a higher chance of winning. Moving on to 3rd place, which is where I have put Yeowon. I'm a Jinho stan. I can't have Yeowon beating him in my ranking. Kidding aside, I think that Yeowon is a fascinating player in the Genius franchise. The entirety of Season 1, you hear about Jinho's sad legend of second place and how this other StarCraft player always beat him and put him in second place. And then in Season 2, they pull the perfect casting move and bring in that #1 StarCraft player. And you're probably expecting this really cool, perhaps intimidating person, and instead you're met with Johan, whose personality could best be described as a lovable but annoying little brother. So much of what he does in this season just consists of wearing people down and purposely disrupting other people's plans. He finds the token of immortality safe without winning a main match clue simply because he pestered other people for their clues. He purposely tanks his own score in multiple games in order to try and force the token of immortality to get used. He never wins a single main match and seemingly purposely keeps a low garnet count or no garnets at all to avoid being dragged to a deathmatch. It really gives you a sense of how much of a nuisance and a troll he must be as a StarCraft player. Honestly, he seems to play the way that fans always say you should. Avoid the deathmatch by any means necessary. Focus on surviving rather than winning. That's something he actively chooses to do, and it usually works well for him. And when it comes down to the wire and he does have to go to a one-on-one match, he's one of the most dominant players. I think that he's the best deathmatch player of the season. He handily wins both deathmatches he's in, and he gets really close to beating Sungmin in the finale. Overall, he's a really likable character, and he consistently shows his ability to think outside of the box and execute unique strategies to get himself further in the game. Also, I just absolutely love his vibe with Jinho, where they're clearly in real life good friends, and he just is constantly pestering Jinho, and Jinho's like, get away from me, you're so annoying. I love their vibe, it's so funny. Speaking of which, in second place, I do of course have to put Jinho. Is it sacrilegious to say that I actually think he played a better game here than he did in Season 1? Because I think he did. I mentioned in my Season 1 player ranking that I tend to see him as a consistent, steady player, and I think a lot of that is due to this season, because he does really play a solid, consistent game here in a way that he wasn't able to in Season 1. And it feels like a complete fluke that he ends up going out where he does. He won the first 4 main matches of the season, which is the same number that he won across the entirety of Season 1. And then, in a very quick fell swoop, Ji-won picks him for the deathmatch, seemingly just to spare his pride as he's eliminated, and then he essentially accidentally beats him. And suddenly, poof, Jinho's gone after being a fairly dominant player for the first half of the season. It still hurts all these years later because it really felt like he could have done it again, could have gone to the end and won again. And if he was gonna go out, we all wanted it to be because he faced off against someone like Sungmin or Johan, not Ji-won of all people. I'm not sure I have too much else to say about him given that this is the second time I've discussed him. Although he gets eliminated mid-season, I don't see it as besmirching his reputation or anything, given that I see it mostly as a fluke. And yes, I'll admit, I was rooting for him still to win over Sungmin until his elimination. I'll give you a little hint towards some of my later rankings, but Jinho isn't my overall favorite Genius player of all time. That honor belongs to someone we'll meet next season. But back when I first watched this, and now, he does end up eclipsing Seongkyu at this point in the franchise just by the sheer amount of time spent on my screen. In The Genius, I nearly always find myself rooting for a lovable strategist over a crafty, big character player, and I think that Jinho versus Sungmin is the epitome of that. And yet, in first place, I do have Sungmin, because anyone who says he's not the best player of the season is objectively incorrect. The man deserves every single one of his flowers for his near-perfect performance in this season. He wins a whopping 9 main matches out of 11. That's an absolutely ridiculous statistic. And honestly, he makes it look easy. He does so well this season that it seems effortless, even though we all know it's not. And not only is he easily the most dominant player of the season, but he does it all with a flair that no one but Sungmin can pull off. Taking every opportunity possible to betray his team, finding the token of immortality and immediately tricking Dewey with it, reading every single other player like a book. And he does it all while coming into the game with a reputation for backstabbing and a huge target on his back for the second half of the season thanks to the token of immortality. It's just an excellent game played by one of the best TV characters of all time, and for all the other negative things I can say about this season, I am always so glad to watch him pull the whole thing off, and that is the highlight of The Genius Season 2 to me. So those are my player rankings for The Genius Season 2 Rule Breaker. I think you can tell how I feel about Season 2 based on the 2 Season 2 rankings I've done so far, but I don't want to spoil it completely because I do kind of want to do an overall season ranking once I'm done with all these. I feel like that'll be a good way to talk about each season as a whole instead of the specific characters and the specific games, because I feel like there are a lot of big picture things to talk about with the seasons that I'm not able to really touch on in these. So look forward to that. Maybe that's a bit tentative, but I want to do that. In the meantime, next week we're going to be moving on to season 3, starting with the main match rankings early in the week. As we speak, I'm once again about halfway through my season 3 rewatch, and I'm having a great time. I rewatched episode 5 last night, and oh, that one is such a banger. You know how sometimes you'll feel like you're overrating something in your mind, and then you'll return to it and you'll realize, oh, no, actually, it's even better than I remembered? That's where I'm at right now. And it might just be the whiplash of going directly from season 2 to season 3 because they are wildly different seasons. Once again, not to spoil my season rankings, but I think you can get a good sense of where I stand with each of them. So yes, season 3 main match and player rankings coming next week. If you enjoyed this one and would like to be informed when those drop, definitely follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're currently listening on. If you're on YouTube, hit the bell so that it'll let you know when I post those. Also, you can follow me on Instagram if you want to see my updates while watching The Genius. They're few and far between, but I do post on there sometimes. And I do also post on there when a new ranking goes up as well, so you will be notified there too. And as always, thank you so much for listening to me as I made some niche references.